it's Lisa. Welcome to my channel. Today I am going to make a card with this background die, and you can see, if you can, I'm going to put this up a little bit closer so hopefully you can see. These are flowers that have dots all in them. So the dots is the actual design. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals, and then the petals are made of all of the dots. And then there's a few of a cluster of 3 dots randomly placed throughout this background die. So it's really, really pretty. Also, it comes with the rounded corner rectangle die that you can cut that out. And I'm going to do some ink blending on here rather than cutting it out of different colored cardstock. I'm just going to cut it out of some white cardstock. And when you're cutting out a background die, you want to make sure that the rectangle is layered outside of the background die. So always place your background die inside of that rectangle so that it will cut it out of your paper. Now for this background die, I'm actually not going to put double-sided adhesive on the back. And the reason why I'm not going to do that is because these holes are so tiny, and if I put double-sided adhesive on the back of that, I'm gonna have to spend a long time trying to get all of the leftover holes out of my die cut, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to die cut it out of cardstock because there's plenty of room here that I can just add glue to this layer when I add it to a card base. So I'm just going to die cut it just like this. So when that comes out of the die cut machine, there's all of your little holes. So you'll need to take one of your tools and kind of just get all of those holes out. And I'm so glad I didn't put the adhesive because these would be sticking in there. I would end up having to poke out each one of these. So see that? And it just comes right out. And that design is so pretty. All right, I'm going to do something a little bit different with this background die. So notice that I did cut the background die out. It's on a piece of cardstock. You can also use your background dies as stencils. So what I'm going to do is I am going to, while I ink blend this background cutout, I'm going to put it on the top of a piece of powdered sugar cardstock, just regular white cardstock. So I'm just going to layer that on like that. And I am going to, well, I want to tape these down. So I'm going to tape this cardstock down, tape a little bit of the background die down as well. And as I tape this down, I want to try and make sure that I'm not covering up any of these dots, because my whole goal is to get a nice background layer on this cardstock. So it's going to look like it was stenciled. All right, I'm going to be using the Cantaloupe, the Lemonade, and the Ocean Stamps of Life ink. And I'm going to go ahead and start inking these up. So I will start with the Cantaloupe. So now I'm going to lift up this paper. Be sure that you don't tear your cardstock, because then I have to come in and add some color to where that tape was. So there's my background piece. Isn't that gorgeous? And then I have this amazing, awesome piece. Look at this. And then all I have to do is just trim this down, and I can use this as a background. Can you see how pretty that is? Next, I'm coloring up my toucan stamp, and this is a Stamps of Life stamp. It's called Toucan 2 Stamp, and I will link that in my blog. And I stamped it out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth cardstock, which is what I use for alcohol marker coloring, and I also stamped it with my Spectrum Noir Finesse Noir Black ink, and I'll also link that in the description if you're interested in knowing the papers and the ink that I use when I use my Copic markers. The Copic marker colors that I'm using are similar in color to the inks that I used in my background, so it matches the ocean and the cantaloupe as well as the lemonade, and I did that purposely because I wanted everything to match. So I will link all the colors that I'm using also in my blog, and once I finish coloring this I will cut it out using the matching die. So my first card, I'm going to start with this background piece that I put some ink on, and I also cut a piece of the licorice cardstock. This measures 1 inch by 3 inches, and that is going to go towards the bottom here, and I'm just going to glue that down. Just make sure when you glue this down that it's at the very edge on the right side. And then I am going to do some stamping on here. I'm going to put a sentiment on here. And I'm going to use my Misty tool because I want to make sure that if it doesn't come out the first time, that I have the opportunity to stamp it again. So I'm just going to position this about where I want it. I'm going to use the sentiment that came with the toucan, so I have toucan do it. So my toucan will be there off to the right, and then I'm going to have the sentiment centered. So I'm going to bring these magnets down just to hold this in place. I'm going to be using my powdered sugar Stamps of Life ink. This is just a white ink. For the card base itself, I used a piece of the licorice, which is the black cardstock, and I cut out using this card base die. This is from the rounded rectangle die set, and I will link that in my blog as well. But I wanted to use this die because it cuts out a card base with the rounded corners. And because this die has rounded corners, I wanted to be consistent with that look. So I'm gonna, it already has the score lines, so I can go ahead and fold at the score lines, and then that is gonna go right on top just like that. So I'm gonna go ahead, because I didn't put the double-sided adhesive, I'm gonna go ahead and apply the liquid glue, and I'm using my Tombow Mono liquid glue, which is a clear glue, because of all these little holes in this die cut. So I didn't want to use the art glitter glue because that's a white glue, and if any of the glue seeps through, you'll be able to see it more visibly on the outside of the card. And then this little toucan, we're gonna put him on the card, and I am gonna pop him up with some double-sided foam. And then I'm just gonna finish off this card by putting some epoxy dots in the centers of these flowers. And that completes that card. For my next card, I'm going to use this layer that I did some ink blending. This was the piece that was underneath the initial background layer. So now I just need to cut this out. So you can either use your paper trimmer and just cut this out into a square shape, or you can use your rounded rectangle die that came with the background die, and you can just die cut it out with this die. Just make sure that if you do this, that you are putting some washi tape, and just put it on there to hold it in place so that when you run it through your die cut machine, it does not slip and cut into your layer. Next, I am going to use these really pretty flower dies. These flower dies came with my Flip It card, and I'll show you what that looks like. It's the Flip It card that has the flower in the middle. It comes with all of these flower dies as well as some of the small ones. And these flowers, they are the same, they look like the same shape as this design, so I thought it would be perfect to put in the middles of these flowers just to add some depth to the background. So I did put some double-sided adhesive foam on the, or not foam, just tape on the back just to make them easier to stick. And when I pop these down, I'm gonna make sure that the petals are pointed with the 5 petals that are on this ink blended background, and just press those down. So I'm gonna do that with all of them. I actually die cut some in cantaloupe, the same color cardstock as I have ink. So I have some in cantaloupe, some in sea glass, as well as some in the lemonade. So now all the flowers are on there. Just flip this over and then just trim off the excess of the flowers that are extending beyond the card layer. So I'm going to use a card base in the sea glass, and this is the rounded rectangle card base that I used in the previous card, using this die from the rounded rectangle die set. And because I wanted to have the consistency with the roundedness. But I also want to put another layer underneath here, because I think if I add some cantaloupe under here, this would bring out some more colors, just adding that other layer. So I cut this piece of cantaloupe cardstock down to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and I'm just going to use a rounded corner punch and then just round these corners, because I don't have a die that will be large enough to fit the outside of this particular layer. So when I layer this on, the roundness is a little bit different. See how it's a little bit different in the corners, but it's okay. I'm not going to be that picky about it. You could always have just cut this into a rectangle and then just, you know, did a rectangle layer. That would have also been more consistent, but I've already die cut this layer out of the rounded rectangle, so I'm going with this. Next, I'm taking I have a hello die that came with the jar word dies, and I die cut the shadow layer out of the sea glass and the letters out of the cantaloupe. And then I'm going to use this as my sentiment on my card. Well, next I'm just going to attach this entire layer to my A2 size card base. And then just to complete this card, I'm going to add some of these these are some silver epoxy dots, and I'm just going to add them to the centers of these flowers. And that completes this card. So isn't that really pretty? I just love how that looks. So once again, here are 2 cards that I made using the 1 background die. So I have the original background die that I die cut and ink blended. And then as I did the ink blending, I had the white cardstock underneath, which gave me this beautiful pattern on the white cardstock. So another 2 ways to use your background dies. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.